So you'll note I'm back on my iPad right here, and with my iPad I'd like to show you the Draw software, so Adobe Draw or Adobe Illustrator Draw. Now I'm working with a standard iPad, so it's a fairly standard size. I like to watch movies on it. It's not too heavy. I'll read books on it, of course, but today I'm going to draw on it. Now if you have a Surface tablet, then you've got something that may be a little bit more precise as far as pressure sensitivity or how you work, or of course there's stylus options available, or of course the new iPads, of course, also have the Apple Pen, larger surfaces, and that means things like pressure and a lot of other things can come into play, and that means you can actually accelerate and do quite a bit of illustration on some of the more modern devices. I just mainly want to sync with the library and give you some overviews and sync with the library elements and the colors that you saw earlier, and I'm going to send the artwork that I carefully create, carefully in quotation mark let's say, but I'm going to send the artwork to Adobe Illustrator to continue working on it. So I'm going to choose a letter size option instead of an iPad. I'm just creating a brand new project, right? I'll be able to save this. It'll be part of my cloud account. Now first up, we'll just demonstrate some features of the brushes. On the left side of the screen are some brushes, on the right side are some layers, and in the upper right corner I've got a little bit of control to work with. I'm currently working on a default draw layer, but note there's also a background. I can create new layers that are drawing based layers, or I can create layers that are for graphics or images. I'm going to select the first brush, which is just a round brush, by tapping on it. By doing so, I now see the settings for the brush. Now if I click on the size and hold just on the screen or tap, I can choose a size. Maybe I'll say 3 pixels. I could then choose an opacity of the brush, but I want to leave the brush at full opacity. And then of course there's the color as well. So again, I can access several color pickers. So first up, if I go to the very picker side on the left, I could then choose a red color, lighten it down below, and then simply move towards the center for picker elements, right? Sorry, for lighter colors. I can darken the color at the bottom with the slider, and of course move the hue around to this circle, which is nice to see I've got a color wheel. There's other options other than a color wheel, like exact RGB values, for example, but I think the color wheel makes a lot of sense. History will remember colors that I've worked with recently, of course, in the middle of a drawing, which would be quite nice to match colors that you just make up on the spot. Themes are preset built-in swatches, and nice to know that those are available. And of course, here's my library. Now at the bottom it says I can change libraries, and these are the libraries I have available to my Creative Cloud account. However, I don't have any colors in the Animate library, but I do have one theme of swatches that you saw me make in Adobe Capture. And you also saw that these colors are available in my desktop Creative Suite apps. Well, they're right here too, and I could choose this red color, for example, and choose to use it. So I have a brush setup, and of course you saw there were lots of brushes. Further at the bottom there's some settings that I can tap on, and note I can change the roundness or an angle or modify the taper of the brush. Those are the ends, making them sharper. And of course pressure dynamics, when available, are also here. I even get a nice preview of what the brush will look like when I draw. So it means I can now begin drawing on this layer with this brush. I'm just using my finger on screen to create strokes and lines, and it's got a bit of taper to it, as you can see as well. Okay. There's an undo at the top, allowing me to do multiple undos through settings that I don't like, so that's again a pretty terrific option as well. I can create a new layer to create new artwork, of course. That was just a tap right there. By doing so, instead of just drawing with my finger, there's preset shapes, things like ellipses or rectangles, or my absolute favorite, standard French curves. Now in all cases, with all the shapes, I'm able to scale it by just pinching, not on top of the object, but around the object. I can let go of the screen, put my fingers down, and then also tilt it. Sorry, I'm going to tilt it, there we go. And I'm moving it at the same time, of course. And then those dotted lines that you see, well, if I drag my finger across there, the brush stroke moves along those lines. The idea with French curves is that you can scale them, right, which you can't really do with real French curves, to be honest, and then also line up the lines so that you could create another element, right, another item around here. French curves are an illustration technique to draw all kinds of custom curves and custom roundness. They're used in font design. They're when drawing by hand, they're used to help design fonts. When drawing by hand, they're used to help design logo elements as well, by getting exact curves around edges. I'm not lining things up perfectly, but I'm really liking how it comes together. And in fact, Adobe Illustrator itself doesn't have a French curve tool, so I'm kind of excited about that. I'm just pinching in to show you what I've done so far. And that's kind of interesting. But on top of that, there isn't just these presets. So there's all kinds of polygons. There's these comic shapes as well. These are kind of like stamps that you can just scale, move around, and also rotate, of course. But the idea is, after choosing a color for them, you just again can click on them and apply, of course, the, oops, I hit the close button, of course. I'll go back to the shape library and choose that item. But you can again just simply double tap on it to apply the color to the object and then close it. I did this on the same layer. Over on the right side, if I double tap on the layer, I can hide or show the layer. Or further, if I just tap and let go, note that I have an option to merge layers together or delete layers as well if I don't want to keep layers specifically. Right? And also the idea that you can always undo those settings. Let's keep that item hidden. In fact, let's hide the other layer and make a new one. Okay. Now to continue, what I didn't show you up here at the top is also this idea, in that I can move over to my library. There's the artwork. There's the shape from before saved in Capture. And that item can be added here, scaled, moved around as well on this new layer. And of course, if I then go about choosing a new color, I'll just choose this blue color, tap on it, double tap, and simply close it up. I can now start working with this artwork, including the idea that, I'm just going to move my little widget out of the way there, including the idea that I can make another new layer, modify the order of the layers, of course, modify the brush size, let's say, modify the color first too. The layer I'm working on is below the drawing layer where you see the bird, and it's selected, so that's the one I'm working on. So I could actually just go about coloring and just sort of coloring in behind the artwork or features like this. That means I can just go ahead and start creating artwork just anywhere I am with my mobile device and simply not have to open up the computer and use Adobe Illustrator or so. But when I'm ready, I can take anything that I'm doing here and then port it over to Illustrator. So in the upper left corner, I absolutely have settings to talk about how this software works and the fact I can rotate the software or add grids or other features. Further though, I have a button that allows me to save this item. So I can save it as a Photoshop file in my library to access in Photoshop. I can copy on a clipboard if I want to paste it into another app here on the device. I could set it up as a PDF. And by setting up as a PDF, it can be available in Adobe Acrobat. But what I'm most, and Behance, of course, is a website where you can share your artwork as well. But what I'm most interested in doing is sending it to Adobe Illustrator. So it says Adobe Desktop Apps right here on my computer on Wi-Fi. I'm not even plugged into the computer, but over Wi-Fi on my laptop computer, I have both Illustrator and Photoshop running, so they're available here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose Open in Illustrator. It'll take a second, but it will tell me when it's sent. So it's just spinning right now. It's working. It's sending. It's now said sent. So if I switch to Adobe Illustrator, of course, I went right by it. If we switch to Illustrator, we can just wait for it to open over in Illustrator pretty much in real time, or very much in real time. Here it is. And this is exactly what I was working on back in Draw on my iPad. Notice that in the layer panel, I have a background layer. There's a draw layer where the eyeball was turned off, but there's that artwork. There is another layer, of course, back in Illustrator, or sorry, back in Draw, where you saw me use the BAM and the French curves or so, and that's another one where the eyeball was off there. It's off here. Here's the colors I was working with, and of course here is the actual draw layer, and these items are all vector-based, scalable, ready to work with, and I could just continue working with them here, of course, and do whatever else I like in Adobe Illustrator. I just have to say File, Save, and save it as a new file. And I now sent artwork from, of course, the device over Wi-Fi to my desktop to continue working on it. And anytime I just save the artwork here, it's available to send over to Illustrator. I have lots of options of where I could send the artwork, but again, sending it straight to Illustrator is very exciting for me. If I say close, that saves it and just takes me to a page that would show me all of my projects. If I then click in the upper corner where there's three little dots, a little ellipsis symbol in the upper corner, note that I can say select. That allows me to, of course, select items, and then I either have an option in the bottom right to duplicate the project if I would like to copy of it to work on instead, or note, of course, in the bottom left there's a trash can that would allow me to delete it. I can say done, And of course from here I could then go about making another new project and starting all over again, and just simply pick another preset to build another actual project and continue working here in Draw. So that's Adobe Draw and how it works with Adobe Illustrator, and some pretty exciting stuff right there. Alright, so I'm back here on my iPad, of course, and I'm going to go back to the touch apps that I have available, and this time I'm going to launch Adobe Comp. Now, Adobe Comp is if you want to put together a layout. So it could be an actual magazine layout, traditional print that you intend on just mocking up and then of course maybe refining in Adobe InDesign. Further, it could be of course a website, right? A responsive website or an HTML5 website, something you may build in Muse or Dreamweaver from Adobe products point of view. Or it could be of course any type of layout. It could be a poster, anything at all. It could be a multi-page project or a single-page project. So I'm going to build something for the iPad because that's what the client has requested, and that's what I'm going to build in Adobe InDesign. But here I want to mock some things up and lay some features out is the idea. So what I've got is, I'll remind you that I've got a thumbnail sketch. I showed it to you again earlier on in the seminar, very briefly on my camera. I didn't take a picture of it, but again I did show that I've got something that I'm working with. And I've got the library of course as well that I want to take advantage of. So first up, this is again simply the first page of this project. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the upper right corner where I can choose some shapes, and note I have some preset shapes here, like of course maybe a rectangle that I can add to the page. Once the rectangle's added to the page, I'm just holding down the mouse and currently just scaling the object, of course. So I'm just making it a little bit larger. Now I could be absolutely perfect in the scaling, but I'm just doing a rough mock-up here, so it doesn't need to be exactly perfect or centered, but there are a lot of alignment and centering tools. There's smart guides. Currently I'm just clicking and holding, or tapping and holding with my finger. Those smart guides are letting me know this rectangle is set right in the middle of the canvas. Down at the bottom, I've got some further settings, so I'm just tapping on the far left side, and I'm opening up a color picker, where of course I could choose a color from the color wheel, the preset themes, the same ones we saw back in, of course, Adobe Draw, and of course, my again preset colors that I can work with as well to use colors from, of course, my theme that I'd made earlier. So I'm going to actually use one of these preset colors or so. Note as well, I have a couple of other options in that there's an opacity level, or of course there's a few other settings, right? So simply things like a stroke can be added around the edge as well. So if I want an outline or a stroke around the edge, that's available. Right? I of course have some further settings, allowing me, of course, to maybe lock the object, right? Or, of course, right, so there's a lock, there's, of course, a duplicate, a copy, a paste. I've got all these options. I'm going to lock this object because it's a color background, and simply it's going to act as a background around the element. So note I can continue to draw more objects, but simply I'm going to move on here. Instead of drawing another object, actually, let's draw one more. Sorry, I apologize. I'm going to have another rectangle. Sorry, here we go. Let's add the rectangle, I apologize, to the page, and I'm going to move it around a little bit and scale it. The smart guides are letting me know that it's snapped right against the edges. In fact, I feel it snapping just like I would in Adobe InDesign. So it's just snapping into that area, which is quite nice, and simply scaled and snapped, and smart guides let me know that it worked. I can choose a slightly lighter version of the same color, maybe add in, of course, a stroke as well, and use the same settings for the stroke also, of course. You just have an outliner just to have again the appearance there, and of course since it's the background, that item can be locked also. So of course features like that are available, and of course I've also got options to lock or unlock objects too. Now this is just a mock-up, so I'll continue. Remember that I've got these libraries to work with that we've seen all along, and I can work of course with the shapes that were added into the prior library, which is pretty terrific. Or importantly, I've got, of course, a lot of other options as well to work with. I have the shapes that are available, the preset shapes in the app, or the shapes that were made earlier. Over here are graphics and images, and if I go to graphics and images, I have placeholders. I can take a photo with my device, so I can use real-time photographs. If I say mark it, Market are features that allow me, built into the Creative Cloud, that allow me to use textures and all kinds of fills and all kinds of clip art elements. So there's textures, there's fills, there's patterns, there's lots going on here, of course. So it's clip art and patterns, or of course there's Adobe stock there also, you'll note. If I go to my libraries, I can then go back to the library I've got, and those are the graphics added earlier. So I could use any of these individual graphics, of course, by again selecting them and double tapping them. So I added an extra one by accident. Note again, and I can have it set, positioned, and of course scaled as necessary. Now this actually isn't in the thumbnail, so I'm making it all up, but simply that's an item. Or again, what I really wanted to do was I wanted to use all of them. So I've got this item to work with. Note it just takes a second to load. These are supposed to go down here. There's supposed to be 9 pages total, and each of these icons represents 1 page in the layout. So I'm just setting it up so they're quite large and can be put together. Of course, the idea is we can copy and paste as well, so that if I'm working on another page, I could paste it in and reuse it at the exact size. Copying and pasting even has positioning, of course, as again an option. Notice that when I tap and hold, it not only says that I can copy, paste, but it says I can paste in place as well to use the exact same positioning in another page. So there's some graphic content happening already. Now to continue, I do want another rectangle, so I'm going to go back to the shapes and add a rectangle. This rectangle is supposed to move across the bottom, of course. So just making sure it's got the stroke that I wanted to see on this object. It's going to pull down a little bit. Here's where I would be adding in things like the Facebook icons and features like that. All right, so it's all set up. Now I don't have those added to the library. I could go back to Illustrator and add them in, but man, I'm not working in Illustrator. I'm in a coffee shop right now. I'm away from my laptop. I'm away from my desktop computer. So I'm just simply stopping and thinking about features. So of course it just means I could use placeholders. I can just use smaller circles that again act for and act in place of the actual circles, of course. I'm just going to use the color black to represent these objects. And I can take them and position them. So these are only placeholders is the idea. But note I'm copying. And then of course I'm just tapping on screen to paste. I'm not using paste in place because, well, I want some separate ones, of course. So there's one each of these for Twitter. There's one each of these, of course, as well for Facebook and for LinkedIn. And again, I'm just making sure they're set. Note that as I was moving them, I was getting icons showing that they were aligning and distributing together as well. I'm going to add just one final item. This would be the main Birds of Canada logo, which I also don't have in my library. But I'm just going to add it in here. And I'm just getting things like the scaling and size to match. Now currently it's the same color as the background, which I don't like. I'm just going to make sure that it is set to black. And just getting the scaling and spacing put together. And that final rectangle right there, I'll also just change the color of to. So it's starting to come together as a bit of a layout. Now to continue, I can, of course, add in a graphic placeholder as well. Right? So this would be a frame that you are also familiar with from Adobe InDesign, even with the X in it right there. I'm just scaling it to match and to fit the area. Now, of course, I now need a photograph in here. So in the bottom, on the left side, it's asking me again what to do with the placeholder. So absolutely I can use my library if there's graphics in there, but it's also asking me to take a picture, use the market option, of course, or on the device I could use the library of my device, of course, and jump into that. So if I jump down here, I've got some photographs set up for the project. You may recall, for example, this picture, right, set up for the project, available and ready to go. I was again showing this a little bit earlier in Adobe Photoshop, of course. Double clicking or double tapping allows me to actually access the graphic inside the frame to scale it within the frame as well. Larger or smaller is necessary. I want it to fit. It doesn't really fit in this space all that well, but I'll just tap away to set that. I could scale the frame or the content within the frame. If I'm looking for placeholder text, I can add in a heading, of course. And not only that, it just says Lorem Ipsum. It's just going to use placeholder text or Lorem Ipsum placeholder text. But the idea is I can scale the size of the text. Now, as far as fonts go, I don't have a lot of choice of fonts. Really, I'm just limited to what's on the device. Now, if I wanted to get into going to Typekit and modifying fonts quite heavily, we could, but I'm keeping it quite simple in that they're just giving me some very, very basic options for text, and I can just keep it nice and simple. But if I want to do something that does represent, of course, a heading or so, they're offering again these kind of options of fonts that are available online to download and work with. But I usually like to keep it very, very simple. I'll just go with maybe a semi-bold option or so. Note that these fonts are just downloading them in real time as I need them, of course. If I go back to text, I've got the option for scaling the size a little bit better than, again, or a little more accurately than I had earlier. I could choose to center align it, of course. I could choose to convert it to all caps so it acts as a title. I can just start setting it up, and of course even things like the color are available to modify as well. Okay, so I've got a bit of title placeholder text right there happening, and then to continue I of course have body text. There's a subheading, but I can just jump straight ahead to body text and just add that in. And the body text, what I really like is as I move it into place, and the smart guides help me align it, as I scale it, it adds in more placeholder text. So again, I don't have the content, and I don't really need the content to work with. I just want to, again, just set it up and comp out and sketch out how this layout's going to look and where things are going to go. And I could be using the real colors and the real elements. I'm using similar colors, but I could be using the real colors based on the fact that I've got the library filled with colors to work with. But not only could I be using the real colors, I'm using the actual real graphics in the project, right? The Photoshop graphic, which I preloaded onto my iPad to make sure it was ready by just making sure it was there. Or further, of course, the actual graphics you saw from Adobe Illustrator way earlier. Right? I can be setting up with the real colors, the real elements. I've got lots of drawing tools and lots of shapes to work with. So if I close it, that auto saves it and allows me to have it saved. Now as far as the project goes, I could continue, of course, just making new pages within the project. And they can even be different sizes. I could start working on an iPhone size or a letter size, or just simply other options as far as the layout or the mock-up goes. Right? I can just go back to editing as well by just continue tapping on it and continue just going back to edit it and go back to the tools that allow me to work with it. Note, like you saw in Draw, there's an undo button. I didn't have a chance to use it. I didn't really make any mistakes or anything, but there's an undo button allowing me to work with this feature, and there's settings showing me that the smart guides are turned on. Or if I'm going to measure features, it's measuring in units. Again, the points units. Down at the bottom it's mentioning lock objects and giving me an option to unlock the features that I'd locked earlier, of course. Because again, simply I can't do that by tapping on them. They're locked. So I've got options to work through them and work from this point of view. And, of course, as I'm working on this page, I can send it to, again, software that I'm working with. I could be using Adobe Muse, which is drag and drop editing for HTML instead of writing code out in Dreamweaver to create a website. If you have Adobe InDesign skills and want to build a website, look into Adobe Muse. It's really wonderful. It's got a lot of built-in features, and it builds responsive websites. It builds HTML5 responsive websites. So I've got an option here for send to Muse. If I'm going to use Adobe Muse to make a website, send to Illustrator if I'm making a poster and I want to continue using Illustrator tools, Photoshop if I'm making a banner or graphic or parts of a website, or of course InDesign if I'm making a layout. And note, it can also be a PDF. So again, it gives me all of those options to work with. Share just gives me a URL that I could send to people. Right? And then therefore I can send a message or an email, sends a URL where they can look at it. Now I'll demonstrate that feature. That's a publish online feature. I'll demonstrate that from InDesign. I just want to stay away from my mail messaging and all those features here. I'm going to send this to InDesign, which is the feature I use the most here. So what I've done is I had, of course, worked on this remotely when I was working simply on my iPad, away from all my computers, away from everything, and I had a chance to sit down with my iPad and just put together some ideas based on some thumbnailing that I've done. This is a much cleaner, refined thumbnail to work from. I could actually turn it into the layout, but I'm treating it as a clean, refined thumbnail. Note, of course, I have two levels to work with. This is where I would keep all my projects and where I make a new project. If I tap on it, this is where you add new pages, and I therefore can add pages within the project, and they can still be different sizes. And then tapping on the page, of course, allows me to modify or edit the page. Now that I'm here, I want to see this in Adobe InDesign. So I'm going to go back up to the top where I can say Send to InDesign, which currently is running. So I can save it, take my iPad home, launch InDesign, but importantly, I currently have InDesign open on the same Wi-Fi network. However, if we were plugged in, if my device was plugged into my computer, it would work just as well. But I'm using a Wi-Fi network, and that will allow me, of course, to send this over to Adobe InDesign. I'll get a sent message when, of course, it's finished. And then I can switch to InDesign here in the computer, and we'll then see that the item will open up and allow me to save it, use it as something I could build a mock-up from, use it as something I could build the layout from, of course, as well. Now, of course, in a perfect world, there wouldn't be missing fonts. Now, what I can do is, if I'm syncing the fonts in my Creative Cloud, that should enable me to use the same fonts I was using on my iPad, of course. So this will allow me to sync this here. If not, I'll just substitute them for a font I am working with. But the fonts on my iPad were fonts that I decided to go and get in real time. And since I decided to go get them in real time, they weren't being used on my desktop computer. But now I'm just using Typekit, the same feature that found the fonts. These are online fonts from the Adobe website, from the Typekit website. But this allowed me to find the fonts from there, and it's just allowing me to sync them here so I can work with them. But note, while this is happening, I'll just move this out of the way, and note the graphic is here, and I'd be able to work with it. I can see items are locked, and I'd be able to unlock them as well. I've got my cursor currently over the lock. I'm using, again, a cloud option. Now this is really nifty. If I edit the item from the library, this item will edit as well. So I can edit the item in the library, it'll edit in Adobe Illustrator, and it will put together and put it allow me to modify that item. If I edit it in Illustrator, it also edits, of course, on my iPad, which is pretty nifty. Okay. So if I go to my libraries, I also have Adobe Illustrator running on the system. Artwork 10 is the artwork I use from my library in the Comp software. So I used it from my library into the Comp software is what I did, because I found it there in my library. That item was made in Adobe Illustrator as a library item. Now you guys recall I edited earlier, and I made the upper left corner bird yellow instead of the brown color it currently is. I also put it back, but I had edited in front of you to show you how that works. I am using it in the Comp on my iPad. I'm using it here in this copy of it as well, the one that, again, I built on my iPad but I now have available to work with here. Now if I have artwork, I can start, of course, adding in these features and adding in, of course, the placeholders. I'll show you sort of a final result when I'm finished here as well. But again, I'll build from here. But just to continue, the idea is that if I double click this item, it will open Artwork 10, of course. It will open in Illustrator. By opening in Illustrator, once Illustrator opens right here, I can select that object. I'm going to use the white arrow tool or the direct selection tool to do so all over again. I'm just going to go straight to the swatches and use one of the preset swatches. It was yellow earlier, but now I'm choosing to maybe use, again, the slightly different color, of course. I'll even go with gray. Just going to go with gray. Upper left corner is different. I can change anything, but it's the upper left corner I'm interested in changing. I'm saving the changes. It's saving the changes to the Artwork 10 library item that came from Adobe Illustrator. I've closed it, of course, but by doing so, the idea is that this item will sync and update. Editing the library allows the item to sync and update, of course. Now it took a second. Now if it hadn't have worked right away, I would have just used the sync option down at the bottom of the library panel to sync it. When it looks like a Creative Cloud symbol, it's synced. If it, of course, has a warning on it, it allows you to sync it, or it has a button that allows you to sync it as necessary. And by having it update and, of course, fix here or change here, the idea is that it updates anytime I need to work with that same library object anywhere else, of course. So, of course, I still have the iPad open, and if I switch back to the iPad, the item's updated there as well, all in real time. So I made a change of a library object in Adobe Illustrator. It edited that library object where I was using it on my portable device. It edited where I was using it in Adobe InDesign, which was a layout created on the portable device, in fact. So there's some really great options here. Now to wrap it all together, I'm going to show you a cake out of the oven, like a cooking show. I have the layout finished, of course. And because the layout is finished, what then happens is I want to see how we can continue to use portable devices or sharing options as well, some more Creative Cloud options to share and show things around some other apps, of course.